Hey, greetings. Welcome to another episode of Nuance Conversations, where we happily operate in the gray space here, right in between the black and white, having real, intelligent, informed conversations about religion, politics, social norms, and pop culture. Today, my name is George Hurt. I am your creator and curator of this space. Today, we have a special guest. We have a dear brother, beloved, one of the greatest minds we have in the Christendom as it relates to preaching, faithful pastor, lover of God, pastor of the Friendly Friendship. It ain't just friendly, it's Friendly Friendship Missionary Baptist Church here in the wonderful city of Los Angeles, in the midst of his very busy, inescapable schedule. It is very, you have to be very on top of to get him and to grasp him. And he is here with us today to talk to us a little about himself, a little bit about preaching, and whatever else flows in this conversation. We've got to swear you in first, okay, to ensure that you are willing to have this conversation with nuance. Just, raise your right hand. There, swear in. There it is. You do. Yeah, he swears in. Yeah, he didn't know what to say. All right, so just having fun. How you feeling today?
Feeling good. Glad to be here with my brother and good friend, all-around great guy, Pastor George E. Hurt.
Where you from, man? Where you from?
I'm from a little town called Surprise, Arizona.
Wow. I'm surprised to hear that.
Yeah. 7,500 people when I left, probably 400,000 now. West of Phoenix, about 25 miles.
So it started to boom.
Yeah, it really started to boom as Arizona built from Phoenix to Glendale, the Cardinals are, Peoria, El Mirage, Surprise, all the way out to Wickenburg, Goodyear. All of that area is brand new.
What's a childhood like growing up in such a small town?
It was kind of nice. My grandfather came from Texas, and he brought all of his kids, my aunts and my uncles. They all moved into the same little area. He was what they call the field boss, meaning all the people that were working in the field, chopping cotton or picking or whatever, they'd come to him and he'd let them work. Well, he brought all of my aunts and uncles. They all moved on the same street, George. Mm. So if you got in trouble at one end, you got like 4 whippings all the way home. Yeah. And from one street to the next street, a whole block, they were selling it for $500. Mm-hmm. So a couple of them got some property and stuff. But small town, everybody kind of knew each other, and that's where it all started.
Bring your mic in a little bit. Yeah, that's interesting. So, what was your migration there? Did you move with your grandparents, with your aunts, uncles?
No, my mom, which is of course my grandparents' daughter. Mm-hmm.
Maternal grandparents.
Maternal grandparents. Grew up there, and that's where I was born in Phoenix, and just grew up with 7 brothers and a sister.
A lot of cousins too, I imagine.
A lot of cousins, all in the same area, same block. Matter of fact, ended up my generation and behind. My brother, one of the best wrestlers in the state. Cousin, Cricket Marshall, one of the best 100-meter, 60-meter person. Tim, football player, cornerback. Joe Paterno came to recruit him, and then I was one of the best track people. All from the same little family.
What did you run in track?
I did the long jump. Mm-hmm. Back then, they called it the broad jump, but that's not politically correct. Can't be jumping no broads today, so they chose it to the long jump. But when I got out of high school, I was the #1 long jumper in the nation. Had about 40 offers of scholarships from West Point to Tennessee to Auburn to Oregon to ended up at UC Irvine.
Ended up at UC Irvine and all of those. Why UC Irvine?
The coach from UC Irvine, there was a coach in Arizona that was a friend of him and told him, man, you got to come check out this King guy. And he came to a meet, and real personable, Lynn Miller. He came to the house and just completely won my mom over. I'll have him call you every weekend. I'll make sure he stays out of trouble, goes to class and everything. And after he left, she looked at me and said, "You going to that school?" I said, "It's not even your choice, Mom. How you going to tell me where to go?" But I ended up going, and great decision, because he was instrumental. He actually didn't coach me specifically. He was a distance runner coach, but he was like a father figure, mentor, and taught me a lot.
That's interesting. I remember Isaiah Thomas telling the story of how he ended up in Indiana. His mom.
Yeah, if you get mom, you get mom.
But the way his mom liked him was that, you know, his brothers were like street guys, and so they're all in the house, and Bob Knight gets in an argument with the brothers, and like he looked at his mom and he's like, "She liking this. She liking it." And so that's a hilarious story.
Yeah, if you get mom, you almost got the athlete, and so he won my mom over, and
so would you have some reluctancy, as it was like, "Oh yes, ma'am"?
No, I just, this was the first person. You know, they give you, at that point they gave us 4 trips. You could take 4 trips. I went to Kansas. They made a big mistake because they brought me out in winter. I'm from Arizona, grew up there. I ain't seen no snow. It ain't never gotten below 60 degrees or something. And I get there and it's like 32, and I'm like, man, I can't come here. So, but it was just, I didn't know. But then once I came to visit Irvine and Orange County, and one of my high school roommates, his brother was on the team. That's how they heard about me. His brother was on the team, and he lived on Balboa Island. So when I came out for my visit, we stayed on Balboa Island, where there were scantily clad females walking all around the beach. And I said, this might be my school right here. So ended up.
So let's talk about God now. Where was all that in your childhood and your development in these years?
I went to a small church in the community. It was just one room. I had a wooden floor where when they were singing the song, they would stomp on the floor. Didn't have any musical instruments or anything. The pastor, Reverend Dunbar, worked on a farm or something. He was bivocational. And so we went to church on Sundays. I don't remember anything he said or taught, but I knew we had to go to church because my mom made us go, my grandmother made us go. But what I remember was when it got to the end of the sermon, he would pick up his Bible and put it on his shoulder and said they marched him up to Calvary. And they hung him on the cross and stuff. So when he put that Bible on his shoulder, I would hunch my brother Freddie and say, "There he go." So he would go by Calvary every week. So I knew Jesus died for my sins. I don't remember Paul was in this jail writing none of that kind of stuff. It was always that end of that thing. And so one Sunday at 10 years old, almost 9, he said that he died and all this stuff and got up early Sunday morning. And I found myself coming down forward to the front of the church and they opened the doors of the church, kind of crying, and I really didn't know why. And I told him I wanted to be saved. Ended up, didn't have a baptism, got baptized in an irrigation ditch. And so I got saved at 10, almost 10. That December, my birthday's in December 18th, like the 2nd or 3rd or something. I got up early one morning on Saturday waiting for cartoons to come on. We had no 24-hour TV. So I'm waiting for cartoons to come on. And I went to the kitchen to get some water or something, and my dad was getting ready for work, and he was tying his shoe, and he fell over. So I went over to him because I didn't know what was going on, and he told me to get Norris, who was my uncle. So I didn't know what was going on, so I ran and knocked on my uncle's door, lived up the street. He said, who is that? I said, "It's Lamont." He said, "What do you want?" I said, "My dad wants you." He said, "Well, what's he doing?" I said, "He's laying on the floor." So he figured out what I didn't, which was something was wrong. So he rushed down to the house, saw my dad on the floor or whatever. A policeman was driving by. He flagged him down. They picked up my dad, put him in the car. My uncle drove him to the hospital. That afternoon, my mom came back and told me he had a stroke. 37, had a stroke. Wow. So I had just gotten saved a month before then. So my first prayer request, I'm asking God to heal my dad. Because every time I go to church, God can do anything but fail. God is a healer. God can make a way. God is, a bridge over trouble. So that's my first prayer request. So I get up probably a week later. I see something I'd never seen before. My mom has a tear coming down, and I knew what would happen. My dad had passed, so we had the funeral and everything. I'm 10 years old. So I really was kind of disappointed in God. I just got saved. This is my first prayer request. It's December. I'm not asking for a bike, skateboard, none of that, skates. I'm just saying heal my dad. I'm hearing all these preachers. God can do anything. He done heal my dad, 37. So we had a funeral, so I just kind of stopped talking to him then. I had kind of nominal religion. I blessed my food and stuff and that. I ended up, I have what they call a eidetic memory. It's like one step below photographic. So school was never a problem. I'd go to class and they say, you know, we got a test today. And I go, what? What chapter? They say chapter 5. I go, so I get a B+ and they be like, we hate you, King. We hate you. So school was no problem, but all the boys, no dad, raised by a single mother. I didn't know, I was smart enough to go to college, didn't know how I was going to go, had these legs and had that track. That got me to college. Once I got my degree and graduated, I got a job. I was training for the 1980 Olympics. And
let's pause for a second. You're in college, you're excelling there.
Right.
But there is your Christianity is nominal at this point.
Yeah, it's nominal.
You're not going to church.
Not really going to church. Blessing my food, knew God, would pray before I competed in race and stuff. But no real growth and learning. I knew the basics from Sunday school when they used to give us a little card with a picture on it and they said, this is Daniel and he was in the lion's den. These are 3 Hebrew boys, they're in the fire. So I knew a lot of the stories. I knew that last part, he died and all that.
In retrospect, is a lot connected to your dad passing at 10 right after you got saved. It's still lingering there. Exactly. You're selling and now you're getting ready for the training for the Olympics.
Right.
Yeah.
So I get out of school. I got a degree from Arizona State because my coach from Irvine, my sophomore year, got the head coaching job at Arizona State. When I got out of high school, I'm the best long jumper in the nation. Arizona State was so sure I was coming to them, they didn't even come to the house 30 minutes away to recruit me. They never even visited. They just knew I was going there. So he got the job there. I went back to Arizona. I got my degree in finance. I couldn't find a job. I ended up doing security.
Wait a minute. You're training for the Olympics, but you're looking for a job as you train for the Olympics. Right. And you moved back to Arizona State because your coach got a job there.
He's there. Yeah. So then I'm running one day from my house to a place called Sun City, Del Webb. It's a retirement community, got a wall around it. It's 2 miles from my house. Where I grew up, the dirt road, I could see Sun City there. Ran across the desert with the German Shepherd, up to Sun City, got to the wall, and I was sitting at the wall looking back where I grew up. I hear somebody say, hey, you been running, huh? And I looked up, and one of the Sun City men, older white man, was sitting there. He had on a safari, had some silver frame glasses. He was kind of looking out, and I looked up. I said, yeah, I've been running. He said, what do you think of that Herschel Walker? I said, what do you mean? He says, I said, he's a pretty good football player. I said, I think the fact that he's going pro, he can always go back to school. I think that's good. He said, you know what his secret is? And I said, what's that? And he says this, Jordan, he gives the glory to Jesus Christ. So when you hear something like that, now's a good time to witness. So I jump up to talk to him about the Lord, and he's gone. Now, I might have sat there longer than I thought, but he said that, and I registered, and I stood right up, and I looked over the fence, and the house was probably 30 feet from the fence. He could have ran in the house. I could have sat there longer, but I'm telling you, I thought he was gone. And I looked, and the street I used to run on, me and my cousins raced from telephone pole to telephone pole was 50 yards. We used to use that government flour to make lanes, and we would race every day. And I went from there all the way to college, to my summers competing in Europe, all the way to getting a degree. And I'm right back here without a job. And it's as if it opened up. It was God who did that all along. And then his first thing he said to me is, you've been running, huh? And I'm saying, yeah, I'm thinking running across the thing. He's talking about running from God. So I run back to the house, open the mailbox. I get a letter from First Interstate Bank in California. offering me a job that's saying I can work half-time, they'll pay me full-time, and I can train for the Olympics the other half. All that quick.
Mm-hmm.
I get ready to come to California to do the interview with them. I have my sister and another cousin who came, and the relative here that I didn't know, he didn't have enough room. He said, you got a cousin, uncle, you can stay at his house. He has a house in Baldwin Hills, View Park.
Mm-hmm.
I get there. His name is Dr. Lewis. He's a pastor. So I stay at the house. I do the interview. He and I become pretty good friends. He said, look, when you first get here, it'll be hard for you to find somewhere to stay. You can stay with me. And I said, okay. Kind of weird because I never knew a pastor personally. Like, are they weird? What are they like? Do they just praise God all day? You know, whatever.
Yeah,
so
pretty weird.
I move in with him, and now I'm going to church Sunday morning. They had 3:30 service, the evening service, Tuesday night mission, 5-day revival. So, but he's an excellent teacher. So I'm learning all this stuff that I never learned before, picking it up pretty quick. I'm watching him, not realizing this whole time God is kind of setting me up to kind of know what it's like to see and to understand and all that. I'm out of college now. So at that point is when my relationship with the Lord really started to grow and to blossom. And I started out a little junior deacon. They let me teach a little Sunday school class. And that's when I kind of saw I had an aptitude, particularly telling the Bible stories and stuff like that. And so it was kind of little by little, I felt like the Lord was calling me in. And that's when I kind of answered my call.
Did you ever make the Olympics? What happened with that?
We boycotted that year with the with Jimmy Carter. So didn't get to go. The next season, I pulled a groin muscle. So,
talk to me about that. How are you feeling when you hear about the boycott? Are you?
Well, I'm very disappointed because in ancient Greece, they used to stop wars to have the Olympics, and now we stop in the Olympics because they having a war or something.
Well,
so
give us more backdrop for those who don't know why the Olympics was boycotted. You know how athletes felt
politically. We were having some issues with Russia. I don't know what they were doing, but as a way now, when they punish, they'll do some economic embargoes or don't trade or whatever. So President Carter felt like the best way to punish them was not to allow our teams to go for 1980. Now, all those years they had the limit, we've never done this. So the year I get there, I make it. They decide not to do. So
you made the team.
Yeah. So I'm kind of devastated. And it's disappointing. And like I said, I hurt my leg after that. And sprinters typically, Carl Lewis was kind of rare, but sprinters typically have a real short window. The further you run, you can run 2, 3, 4 Olympics if you run the 10,000, 5,000. But sprinters, you usually got a real narrow window. You can make 1 or 2 maybe. Carl made several, which is kind of rare. But very disappointed. I'm getting ready to get on the Wheaties box and everything else, and all this is now gone.
Literally, were you being ready to put on the Wheaties box?
No, I'm that good. I'm world class, and I want to do it. So,
is there means of protest? Were there advocacy? Did somebody?
Well, really, people felt bad, but nobody. There was nothing organized. We didn't do anything. We just kind of U.S. isn't going this year, and it was all across all sports, gymnastics, track, everything. So. We didn't get to go, and I hurt my leg. So now I'm working at a bank. I'm a banker, and I'm living with the pastor. I'm growing quickly. I answer my call, and it's then I look back and see that whole period God was kind of the memory, the eidetic memory, the getting saved at 10. I finally see he's taken an earthly father, but right before that gives me a heavenly father. I got saved like 2 months before that. So I feel like, so what I'm mad at him about, he took my father and my cousin, them, they got their dads, teach them how to catch a fly ball, how to hit a curve, how to whatever. I have nobody. So I look back and I say, okay, he gave me the heavenly father before he took the earthly father. I never did kind of rebel, stray, just I don't care about school, no more grades. My dad's going. I never did that. I always got good grades and everything. Stayed pretty much on the right track. And then and then got the degree and was in a position to get into ministry. I'm living with a pastor. I can teach class. I can learn stuff. And I was out somewhere and I bumped into. Oh, I said if I was going to do it, I wanted to be educated. I didn't want to just be a preacher doing some stuff. I wanted to go to school. So I bumped into my college girlfriend from Irvine. Hadn't seen her in at least 15 years. Mm-hmm. She was going to school to become a chiropractor out in Whittier. So she said, why don't you come, let's have lunch and catch up. So I go have lunch. When I'm leaving, she introduces me to a recruiter from their school. And the lady says, would you like to come here to go to school? And she said, oh no, he just answered a call to be a minister. And she said, my husband's a minister. And so I didn't think anything of it. About a month later, Penny calls me and says, you remember the lady you met? I said, yeah. She said her husband was a minister. Well, he's teaching at a school and they got scholarships, 80% scholarship for people who want to go. Are you interested? I said, yeah. So I called him. 48 hours later, I was enrolled at Azusa Pacific with a theological school, graduate school, with an 80% scholarship with from the Lilly Foundation. Mm. So the prayer, I want to go to school, they're paying for it now, books and everything. And I started going to school there. And then probably a year later, I'm at another school, Biola in La Mirada, in the bookstore. And I bump into Jimmy Washington and John Coleman. And of course, Jimmy's telling me, I told him I was at Azusa, and he's telling me, well, you need to get your theology at this school. This is solid theology. So he goes through this whole big old thing. Long story short, he ends up at Azusa Pacific because he's in the Methodist denomination, and they wanted him to get a degree from a Methodist school. So even though he took most of his classes at Biola, he has to transfer to Azusa to get the Methodist degree. So I ended up getting a degree from Azusa. I worked managing the computer department at Biola, so I was getting credits at both schools. I got a Master of Divinity from Azusa Pacific. I got a Master of Art in Bible Exposition from Talbot, Biola. And at Biola, we had a book called Biblical Preaching by Haddon Robinson. They introduced me, and so every time I'm doing a sermon, I'm walking through these steps he has in the book. A couple of them I didn't understand, so I said, man, I don't understand. So I Googled his name, found out he was at Denver Seminary, I think. No, Gordon Conwell. So I Googled his name, called Gordon Conwell, said, I'm trying to reach Haddon Robinson. They said, hold on. He says, hello? He was on the phone. So I said, man, I got your book here. I'm trying to understand some stuff. He said, yeah, that's a problem with books. They're not real clear. So we talked for 2 hours. He said, hey, you sound like a pretty good guy. We got a program here, a doctor in ministry and preaching you might be interested in. Mm-hmm. And so 48 hours later, I'm enrolled in the doctor of ministry program at Gordon Conwell to study with Haddon Robinson, who wrote this book, who said to all of us, all things considered, he considered Black preaching the best preaching in the world for everything that we inherently, instinctively bring to preaching. So studied with him, and I had his protege, Dr. Sanukian at Biola, Talbot. So between those two, I really got pulled.
What's the time frame of this? All this.
This is happening.
It sounds like this. This is back to back to back.
No. There was some time in between. After I got out of school from Arizona State, and with my uncle and that took about.
How long did you live with your uncle?
About 6 years.
And you
finished in that time, I got the
master's.
I got the master's, right,
and from Talbot.
Exactly. As part of the program at Azusa, they wanted everybody to work in ministry, not to just have a degree and never actually been in a church or anything. So I work at a little church called Del Air in Hawthorne, all-white church. I'm working with the youth. The pastor there gets a call to another church. They asked me to pastor. I said, well, I'm finishing up school. If you got to let me finish school, y'all run the church. And at the end, let's talk about it. We did that. So I became pastor at Del Air Baptist Church.
All white church.
All white church, one black family at the time of the Rodney King riots.
Mm.
So they would bring their friends, and their friends would be like, there's a color guy up there. And they're like, just hold on. You're gonna enjoy it. So I had an all white church basically at the time of the Rodney King riots in Hawthorne. And again,
No family life at this point.
yeah, no family life at this point.
Mhm.
Again, God has so orchestrated things that I'm kind of what they call bicultural. I can function in my culture.
Back in the 90s.
Yeah, but I can function also in the business world, Caucasian world, whatever. So, and I wasn't what they would have called a scary hooper. I didn't scare them or anything. I just kind of talked and used humor and stuff like that. So that's how I ended up in ministry full time.
And so how long did you stay at the bank before you start working at the school?
I worked at the bank 6 years, and then I ended up at the school and going to school.
So simultaneously we were living with your uncle.
Right.
And then you end up working there.
Exactly.
Yeah, how long was your tenure there at the church in Hawthorne?
I was there 8 years.
How was that?
That was a good experience. I actually discovered that we probably had more conflict with music than just race. I remember distinctly one Sunday, I had Kelly Taylor as my musician. I brought him in because we had a girl from Russia who couldn't speak English, and the music was killing me. So I brought in Kelly, and Kelly had the Hispanic and Caucasian people. He that time, Kirk Franklin, someone asked the question. He had them singing that, sounding like they was from the hood. So he was rocking. But anyway, one Sunday I said, we're going to sing a song everybody knows. We can all get together here. By this point, I got a mixture of probably 30% African-American, 70% Caucasian. I said, we're going to sing Amazing Grace. And so we get ready to sing Amazing Grace, and they took off. Bam! Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound to save the rest like me. And we were on the so that's what I figured out. We probably had more conflict with music and age, young versus old, than we did.
Did you ever address race during that time? What we call social justice? You said Rodney King's going on. Did those things ever come up? I know California's a little bit different than Southern and even East Coast cities in that notion.
I absolutely did. And I think I kind of base it on the education I got at Azusa Pacific was far more social activism and social gospel. Walter Rauschenbusch. We actually covered this. They weren't even mentioned at Talbot. They were more, we're going to teach you how to exegete the Bible, know the original language and that, but and theirs was kind of the privatization of sin. Everybody has individual sin, and all the problems in the world come from individual sin. They weren't really addressing racism versus other specific sins. They were just saying, all you need to do is get everybody saved, and that'll solve all the world's problems. Whereas at Azusa, we had to work in the inner city with the homeless and with others, and they were showing specific manifestations. And so I had kind of a pretty good mixture. And much of the African-American church tradition, as you know, we deal with all kinds of issues because we're saying the earth is the Lord and the fullness thereof, and we can address, whatever comes up.
Right.
Yeah. I do know that Pastor Mark, who was there before me, when the Rodney King hit, he wanted to talk about race, and they forbid him. They told him, you better not say anything about race from that pulpit. And he didn't.
He was a white guy.
He was a white guy. But I would bring up issues, I would bring up concerns just because that's all I knew. And that's what I thought was right. And when I had my grid for application, I might have a single person, a married couple, a retiree, a teenager. One of my little constructs was the poor, the oppressed, people, racism, stuff like that. So I would apply in all those areas as well so that people would understand, that the gospel has something to say about those things.
Did you have ministry initiatives that dealt with that? You talked about Azusa, you had to go feed the poor and things of that nature. again, I know we're dealing with LA, you're dealing with maybe middle class,
Right.
upper middle class.
Yeah.
Did y'all have specific outreach left that you were doing?
We didn't have a lot of grassroots kind of stuff. We were doing, as you said, middle class. We were doing more, let's get some scholarships to help some of the kids go to school and things like that. We weren't doing as much the feeding, the clothing of the hungry. We were doing kind of scholarships. It was more, like you said, the application came out to be probably more middle class and what the church was comfortable with.
So what's next? You're there 8 years.
I'm there all that time. I leave there. I'm not sure what I'm going to do. I get a...
You resign?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I get a...
What led you to resign?
I resigned because at that point I was getting ready to move. I got married, was going to Kansas. So I did ministry in Kansas probably. I just did an interim. And this was weird for me, George, because I went from a Baptist church to a Disciples in Christ church.
Mm-hmm. What made you go to Kansas?
That's where she was from.
Okay.
And so we were there. I met a Disciples of Christ church. Doctrine was pretty similar to Baptist, except we did communion every Sunday.
Okay.
Every Sunday. They were part of a group with United Church of Christ, where they have 4 different denominations who recognize each other's ordination and that.
Mm-hmm.
So from there, the church I was doing interim asked me to be pastor, but I accepted a call from a church in New Orleans that was United Church of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And now this was a completely different world for me.
I know you're going to LA, Kansas, New Orleans.
And so I'm in the South. So I'm saying, okay, I've heard about the South. Let's see what happens. But it wasn't a Baptist church. It was United Church of Christ. Again, kind of middle class in that. And very, very, very much socially involved, socially active, civil rights, voter registration, social gospel, racism, addressing issues like that was a completely different world for me. But where I think they had their deficit was when it actually came to the Bible and exegesis and knowing the Bible, they were not. So I did very well in just preaching expositorily through the Bible and teaching them to actually understand what the Bible is saying. Because they were going to do the causes and stuff regardless as to if they really understood passages. It was like, well, we know God is on the side of the poor, so we're out here doing this. So
where does the D-Man play in all this?
I'm doing the D-Man at this point.
In New Orleans. That's when you started in New Orleans.
So I'm doing the D-Man at this point. I'm doing it in preaching. And I ended up doing my project on expository preaching in the African-American tradition. Because part of the stereotype was that Black preaching was exciting, engaging, interesting, creative, but not necessarily tied to the Bible. Mm-hmm. Some people thought we took too much freedom. Mm-hmm. And I was contending that we had preachers who retain the best of what we bring, creativity, imagination, bringing the stories to life, narrative preaching, and stuck with the Bible. Mm-hmm. And so I did the study, I did the research, and then I also included DVD with examples like Tony Evans, Maurice Watson. There might have been even R.A. Williams. I had from hoopers to straight teachers like Tony, who dealt with the Bible, who retained the best of our tradition, and that's what I ended up focused on.
In this process, who are some of the pastors and preachers that you looked up to that kind of mentored you, be it from afar or up close?
At that time, I would say
throughout the process.
Mm-hmm. Once I got here with my uncle and I started getting introduced, I loved Manuel Scott Sr. Not because he was a straight expositor, but he had a down home wisdom, practicality that made a passage come to life, and it wasn't simply exegesis. He wasn't talking about the Greek or the Hebrew, but when he finished, you knew what the passage mean, you knew what you needed to do, and it was very clear. So I put that all into the rubric of biblical preaching, preaching the Bible, but in a way that just made sense. So he was one I liked, got introduced to here in LA. E.K. Bailey would come every year for Pastor Wade. He was another one that could tell stories and I could follow. A pivotal turning point for me and one I really looked up to was Bishop Kenny Omer. Again, with my uncle, small church, he comes in and he preaches. I'm able to follow this guy from beginning to end. He's giving me background, context, culture, all of this stuff. He's explaining where Paul is, what he's writing, context. So afterwards, I went up to him. I said, "What did you just do?" He said, "What do you mean I preached?" I said, "I was able to follow you from beginning to end." He said, "It's called expository preaching." I said, "Why don't all preachers do that?" And he started laughing. But I got a college degree, and this is the first person I really could understand. And so that's what got me onto this. There's a way to preach where people can actually remember, understand, and it makes sense. And again, I like the hooping, but I'm a little scared of it because you got to go through a learning curve and you can be sounding pretty bad before you sound good. And I had too much pride. The Lord had not delivered me. I didn't want to sound bad. And most of the people I knew practiced when they were young. And by the time they ended up preaching, they were very good at it. I didn't want to go through that. And the other thing that helped me was because I didn't have that gift initially, I had to really study and get into the text and have something to say. And that helped me because building my foundation on that, as opposed on the celebratory part, I was not using it to bail out because I didn't really have anything to say. So that worked out good for me.
Yeah. How would you define expository preaching?
I would say expository preaching is, in its simplest form, exposing the text and its context, bringing it from back then and back there to here and now with the implications of applying it to my contemporary audience. A good expositor, when they finish, you should know more about that passage than when they started. I think it's Joe Gregory says, he labels some sermons, called them the Star Spangled Banner sermon. He says at the beginning of a football game, they play the Star Spangled Banner, and for the rest of the game, you don't hear any more about the Star Spangled Banner. And he says some sermons start like that. They read a text, and for the rest of the sermon, you don't hear anything about that text. So for me, expository sermon is letting the Bible speak, being a mouthpiece for the Bible, explaining, applying, proving the Bible, but letting the Bible direct itself rather than preaching over it, under it, around it, letting it speak. To again, where when the audience leaves, they should know more about that particular passage than when you started.
Yeah, I think Haddon Robinson uses that illustration in biblical preaching too well, if I remember right. New Orleans, how long were you there?
I was there 5 years. I left in November 2004, right before Hurricane Katrina. Matter of fact, where I was living, all of that area got wiped out. I had a shed in the back with 600-700 books in there. All of that got flooded, gone. I had just left right before that hit. And I came back to California. Kelly Taylor, my good friend, called and said, "Hey, King, there's a church here I think you would really like." I had 3 older daughters here in California, so I wanted to kind of get back. And so I turned in the application for Friendly Friendship, went through the process. They called me. I preached my first sermon here on Thanksgiving Day, 2004.
Wow.
So I'm back in LA at this point.
On a Thursday.
On a Thursday. Right. St. Augustine Baptist Church on Figueroa. Preached there. That was my first sermon back to town. It was a district function. And for whatever reason, I guess the brethren put me up to see who's this brother, can he preach? So that happened on that Thanksgiving.
You hadn't took Friendly Friendship yet?
Yeah, I accepted it. I had not actually preached there yet.
Oh, so they hired you without hearing you preach?
No, I came, I interviewed and everything. I accepted the church. I moved out here, and my first time preaching in LA was on Thanksgiving Day. That Sunday, I preached at Friendly Friendship.
Oh, so the following Sunday you preached at Friendly Friendship, but you got the church.
Yeah, I got the church. I already had the church
without preaching there.
No, I did preach. I went through the interview process. I preached a couple of times.
At Friendly Friendship.
At Friendly Friendship, I did the.
So your first time preaching back in LA was as pastor.
As pastor.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
okay.
As pastor. Yeah, I came two times, I think, to preach.
Mm-hmm.
The first time, and then they got the number down to however many they had, 3 or 4, and I preached again. They voted, and I ended up.
Were you excited to be back in LA?
Yeah, I was excited to be back in LA. Wasn't quite sure. Didn't know the church. Other than the search committee, didn't know the church, didn't know, what I was getting into, where it was. Kelly told me it was a good church. He grew up there, and he said they always took pride in their pastor. He said, pretty mixed group, educated and straight from the hood too, but all ages, very demographic, and he was right about that.
Yeah, so it's your 4th church.
Yes.
How was it being back in LA?
It was nice being back in LA, weather-wise, people-wise. I was closer to my kids. I liked it. And then my uncle still had his church here on 79th and Broadway. So, and I knew a lot of people. So it was like being back home, and it was comfortable. And I had something to compare it with. Mm-hmm. Had the all-white church in Hawthorne, had the Disciples Church in Kansas, had the UCC church Congregational Church in New Orleans, and then back to Baptist here. So
UCC is United Congregational Church?
Yeah.
Okay.
UCC is Disciples of Christ, Congregational, Christian, and Reform. All 4 of those recognize each other's ordination. Together, they're called the United Church of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
They have some doctrinal issues a little bit, but differences, but they're all pretty much the same.
And is racially diverse? Racially
diverse, extremely religiously, politically, very progressive. Very progressive. It wouldn't be what you call evangelical. They were pushing. The Congregationalists were the ones who, when the ship got here, the Amistad that had slaves on it, they were the Christians who fought to let them go back to their country instead of keeping them here in America. So they had a long history of fighting for the rights of the underprivileged, the oppressed, the poor, all of that.
Wow. Tell me about the integration of coming back west, not back home because you're from Arizona.
Right.
What's some of the things that's standing out in those early years?
In the early years, what was standing out to me was I was starting to kind of formulate in my own ministry, in my mind and head, that there was still the very traditional Baptist church with the deacons doing the devotion and
leading the church
and that. And at this point, Fred Price, a couple of other people were coming out with a kind of teaching style in that. And a lot of the younger guys, or the guys my contemporary, were considering, instead of waiting in line with the national progressive or whatever to get a position, they were saying, we're going to kind of do our own thing in a different manner. So coming back, I was kind of wrestling with how traditional do I want to be and how progressive do I want to be in terms of what our church is. And although most of my foundation is in traditional, coming out of banking in the business world, I had developed an affinity for, having an agenda, doing things timely, having organized business meetings, and not just whenever the Spirit moves and we're gonna start and leave. So I kind of think merged the business world and pragmatics with the best of church. Always been one who's kind of cognizant and concerned about time, because it seemed like we were just doing stuff and could have been done in half the time, but nobody was ever in a hurry. And I didn't want to rush, but at the same time, I found out there were other people like me out there who wished there was somewhere they could go and, worship and do and move on. So that's when I started formulating, my own personal way. But very much so from my upbringing, my uncle and that, very much a pastoral heart. I'm going to go to the hospital. I'm going to pray with you. I'm going to do visitation. I'm going to be pastor.
There's two aspects of LA that either has changed, evolved, or evolving during that time. Your church is on the east side. The migration of a large immigrant population, specifically Mexicans,
Right.
are taking place. And then there's also the mega church shift,
Right.
that's kind of all being dominated in LA. You mentioned Fred Price, but then you have, and you correct me if I'm right, Kenny Omer,
Right.
Charles Blake,
Right.
Noel Jones, Clarence McClendon,
Right.
is going on at the while, and some of that is being
Okay.
cherry picked out of the traditional black church,
Exactly,
for various reasons.
right.
Talk
And
to
full
us about
gospel
that.
too.
And full gospel as a movement is
Right.
taking place
Exactly.
as well. That's kind of cherry picking and
Exactly.
changing the dynamics of LA. The first part is changing the dynamics of LA and black people
Right.
in general. The second one is changing the dynamics of LA black people and Black Baptist churches.
Right.
And they marry together in some. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Excellent question. As I said, I'm looking at all of this, all the things that you talked about. One of the things, as you know, when it comes to pastoring, in its purest sense, you and I don't have the privilege of just picking up a newspaper and saying, "Here's a job, let me go apply for it." But part of what's involved is God has some say-so as to where you're going to end up and where you're going to end up ministering.
Mm-hmm.
And so you wonder why in the Bible, Amos is, he's from Surprise. He's a country man. And God sends him to downtown because the ministerial association is corrupt. And you're saying, why would you send a farmer downtown? But that's God's sovereignty, where he places ministers and the ministry that they have. So part of it for me, George, has always been, yeah, people vote and yeah, you apply and all this, but if God is not involved, you just can't end up certain places. I never felt like I had the calling to be a church planner or start churches. So I felt like he opened the door at Friendly Friendship in South Central. There's a transition going on, as you say, where in our neighborhoods and up and down the street, I'm watching more and more Hispanic families are moving in and this and that, South America, Latin America, Central America. And talking to them, they said, a realtor told them, "We found a house for you." They didn't know they were in Watts. They didn't know they were in South Central LA. They just said, "We can afford a house here," and they're moving in. So demographic is changing in the neighborhood. My church has a pretty good mixture, educated, still going to school, everything else. So I feel like God placed me there. But I also felt like some of the traditional things, devotion, all that would kind of
Good.
away.
Good. Let's dig deeper here, though.
Okay.
Tell me the commentary on the how, the why, the pros, the cons, the concerns, even looking back from a retro's perspective of how specifically, almost seemingly to me as a newcomer in this area around the same time as you, that the Black Baptist Church either was not ready or refused to react in an appropriate way to maintain the leverage that we had, be it by those spaces on the east side and membership and dominance as the traditional been, because the common factor of all those places I named was charismatic,
Right.
non-traditional being, still have the celebratory, except for Word of Faith, Fair Price,
Right.
still have the celebratory elements to it,
right.
but there's seemingly a lot of things that you talked about that you had from your corporate world,
Right.
organization, presentation, cutting edge, trying out different things. And even now to see, if we go even deeper, to now to see that most of them now have either plateaued or it's definitely not excelling in the way that they once were.
Exactly. Excellent questions and discussions. I was kind of wedded to my uncle who had helped me so much.
Mm-hmm.
He's straight to the left traditionalist.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't, he'd get upset talking about, Jesus is more important than the Super Bowl. So we have church Sunday on Super Bowl Sunday. Mm-hmm. and stuff. So, he's not going to say, well, let's have a Super Bowl party. We can, at halftime, we can talk about the Lord. He's like, oh, they're not competing with my Jesus. You're a bad Christian if you're not in church on Super Bowl Sunday. So I have that part I'm fighting against. If I had been able to really pick out and say, let me go and talk to Dr. Omer and see if he'll mentor me. Because I could see where he was going and I could see how it was working.
You knew him.
And I knew him. And he was one who, when I said to the Lord, when he really was pulling me in, I'm like, I can do that. Mm-hmm. If I can preach like he does, I'll do it. Because everybody I knew, Wade and everybody was killing it. They're bringing Jasper and So I said, if I can do like Omer, he like, hey, be yourself. And Omer was that model. And then he was progressive. He's meeting in a high school and stuff. Gary McIntosh, who taught church growth at Biola, still teaches it.
Mm-hmm. Great guy.
Yeah. He told me, he studied all these churches. He said, and I'm dumbing it down, but he said in essence, African Americans don't really believe you got a real church unless you got a building like with a cross on it and stuff. So if you meet at a high school and some of this other stuff, we might deal with you a little bit, and the younger generations will. But we need to know you legit with a building with a cross on it and that. So Omer meeting in a high school, Washington High, with bleachers or people sitting, that was kind of unheard of. Mm-hmm. Fred Price wasn't really, as you know, for Baptists, he wasn't really walking around with the Bible open teaching. He wasn't really considered, that Baptist flavor, and he didn't have the celebration. So I'm looking at all these people, like you said, Full Gospel starting up. You got some younger people. And to me, it seemed like it was an individual thing, depending on that particular pastor and his vision and the kinds of things he was able to do. I saw it starting to happen. I had the business degree, the business world, and those things coming in. And there was always something inside of me that, to what you were saying, Jim Collins had a book called Good to Great. And one of the things, I had to read it in business, one of the things he kept saying was, the greatest companies, and now we're talking even churches too, the greatest companies are constantly asking the question, how do we improve what we do? And you're even talking about today, those top churches that were progressive, now they're kind of plateauing, and we got to ask questions. Even after COVID, to my embarrassment, we were still passing the basket. That's the only way you could give. Mm-hmm. We weren't looking and saying these millennials and others don't carry cash. They have an ATM card. Mm-hmm. I have young people say, Pastor King, you knocked it out of the park. I gave you all the money I had in my pocket. I said, how much was that? They said $3. If I had more, I would have given you more. But Collins said the best companies are always asking the question, which the church should be doing, how do we improve on what we do? What business are we in? And how do we improve on what we do? And his example was, you got to get the right people on the bus, and then you got to get the right people on the bus in the right seats. Mm-hmm. We just say, who wants to volunteer, who wants to do something. We don't necessarily get the right people on the bus, and we definitely don't necessarily get them in the right seat. And I started noticing what he said was true. So I would go to Office Depot and buy an ink pen. And by the time I got to my car, George, I got a survey that said, was the ink pen easy to find? Mm-hmm. Did we have all the colors that you wanted? How was the person who checked you out? Would you recommend to your friends that we buy an ink pen from you? Now, this is a 99-cent ink pen, and you and I have a priceless gospel. Mm-hmm. Why are they more concerned with the best way to get you to get that pen than we are to get the gospel out? And I think churches and ministries and ministers who don't ask these questions, how do we improve what we do? How can we make it better? It may be great. Now, we don't have to change the message. We don't change the theology. We don't change the Savior. That's Jesus Christ. But is there a way to make it? McIntosh asked us in a class to guess what the two most important factors at a church are. We guessed a million things, and he ended up telling us bathrooms and parking. He said people don't go where they can't park, and women won't go where there's a nasty bathroom. And those are kind of things we just didn't think about. Most of the churches around me, George, including my church, we got a big building, but we got 4 or 5 parking spots. We didn't think about parking. And now even if you want to change something at the church, the first thing the city asks is, we're not going to let you build anything that doesn't support the parking.
Right.
So these are the kind of things, and I think you're very astute to notice that we constantly have to ask the question. It's not enough to say, I got the nicest, jammingest, most happening church in LA, because eventually it's going to pass you by if you don't continually ask that question. How do we do what we do better? Whether it's Zoom, FaceTime, online, whatever. How can I improve it? How can I do better what we do? We have a camera that we stream on. And then people telling us streaming said that people can get fatigued from watching just one view. So you need more than one camera. So these are all things, again, we got to constantly ask the question, how do we improve on what we do to become a better church?
You're I want to revisit that conversation, but I want to kind of add a flavor to it. You're naturally insulated, which I think is a good thing, especially in LA and preaching. What do you say is the reason why you tend to be, from a social standpoint, more insulated?
I think, George, what we do as ministers and what we are, I think you have to protect that. And I think you have to continually, in some way, have to be continually refueling. A pastor can give out a lot in a day, in a week, in a month, between counseling, visitation, praying for the sick, praying, podcasts, preaching, preparation. And I think at some point you have to constantly, you have to kind of protect that. And I think, again, just the way God is sovereign, it's really, to me, nothing more than discipline. And I developed that with track. By the time I got to college, I'm at Arizona State. We're known as the party school. I couldn't be partying every night. We got all kind of stuff going on every day. I couldn't be a part of that. If I'm working out hard, trying to be the best in the world in what I do in sports, it requires getting up at a certain time, working out a certain amount of hours, being in the weight room, getting a certain amount of rest, preparation, getting my mind together, thinking about it psychologically. All of that goes into it. And I think developing those patterns from track, when I got into ministry, where you don't have a boss looking over your shoulder. You got a congregation, but day to day, there's nobody really watching what we do. You got to have discipline. And natural ability can carry you a long ways for a long time, but eventually people in the know, they may not say anything to you, but you know what preachers are really putting in the work and which ones aren't. It becomes evident after a while. So I think I've just learned to try to, everything that's flashy and shiny out there that tries to get your attention and distract you, you have to make your decision what you're going to be and what you're going to be about. And I like to tell people a postage stamp is successful because it sticks with one thing till it get there. And you almost got to be like that if ministry is what you want to do, and do it effectively, because you just can't do everything.
Yeah, absolutely. let's talk about what I believe, and anybody that's heard you preach before would share this assessment, um, which is that you're one of the best preaching minds that we have, not black, white, not LA, just period. Tell us about your philosophy on preaching. I know we talked about expository preaching a little bit, and a little bit about the process of getting you there, and then the practice as it relates to presentation. If we were being elitist, we will say your hermeneutics and your homiletics.
Big old words and all them kinds of. Thank you.
Just your philosophy of preaching first and foremost. Your philosophy.
Well, thank you for the compliment. I again, George, it's kind of tied with me with sports. Being able to pick up track and field magazine at certain months of the year and see that I'm the number one 200-meter runner, the number one long jumper in the world, and what it took to get to that point. And I know, how much time and energy and everything you have to put in. I brought that when I felt like the Lord was calling me to preach. I brought that to preaching too, that I want to be one of the best who does it. So that's why my first prayer was, let me go to school. And I was able to go to school. And then I would listen to preaching. Now, back then we didn't have YouTube and all that, so you could get a cassette.
Cassettes was a thing.
Yeah, and then I would listen to people, and they would say, "Man, you got to hear E.K. Bailey. You got to hear Melvin Wade. You got to hear Jasper Williams. You got to hear C.A.W. Clark." And I would listen to all these guys. I would buy the cassettes, and I would just listen to see what they did well. And didn't know what I was doing, because at that point I didn't know.
You didn't have titles. You didn't have hermeneutics.
I didn't know hermeneutics, all that.
Expository, biblical.
Exactly. I didn't know any of that.
You just listened for
I'm
ear
listening, and I'm
and
saying
had
this
appreciation
Tony,
of what you were hearing.
This Tony Evans has a lot of illustrations. So I'm going, man, he got illustrations for everything. I'm watching Dr. Clark. There's a wisdom underneath. He's not in a hurry. He's throwing some stuff out there, but he's building and makes sense. I'm watching Manuel Scott Sr. say something that comes out of his mouth and floats over your head and then blows your mind. Like, that was so simple, but so profound. So I'm listening to all of these guys. Every chance I got, like with Bishop Ulmer, I would ask the guy, George, how did you come up with that? That was so creative. You did a first person. And first time I saw that, I would talk to people. I would study. I got Haddon's book, and it helped me to understand a lot of the things about Haddon. One of the things Haddon said, that most sermons don't have too many ideas. They have unrelated ideas. And a good sermon, the ideas stick together. So I'm looking at all of these kinds of things. I got a drive and a desire to be the best, not just good. I want to be one of the best. Magic Johnson got here to L.A., and one of the channels on the sports channel here had what they call Turkey of the Week. And they would put a athlete up and call him Turkey of the Week and tell you why. So Magic gets Paul Westhead fired, and they put him on as Turkey of the Week and said, he's a rookie, how dare he? The next night, Magic comes on and says, this guy called me Turkey of the Week, said, how dare me, and that I'm a rookie and I haven't paid my dues. And he said, I used to get up in Lansing, Michigan every Saturday with a pocket full of dimes, and me and my best friend would ride to the park, and we would play on that court till we took it. And then I would call around Lansing to find the next hottest game, and we'd ride over there and take that court. Then we would call around. He said, I've been doing that since I was in high school, so don't tell me about paying dues. So that kind of mentality of you're going to put in the work, people see it later, but they don't know, you're in practicing on dribbling with both hands, shooting with both hands. You put in the work. So I had that kind of mentality. I knew what it took to be world class. And again, I want to do this in preaching. So I'm listening to everybody I can. I'm reading, voracious reading. I'm reading everything that I can. I'm trying to understand, but my goal is to be one of the best. And that's what I'm working on. I get to go to school. I get exposed to Haddon and his book. I get exposed to Dr. Sanukian. And part of what that did for me was it gave me a language and a nomenclature to classify what the black preachers were doing. Creativity, imagination, what their idea. Now, we might not have called it that, George, but we were doing it. Good preaching has certain things in common. Restatement, a central idea, driving the point home. So we were doing all of this without the technical names and all of that. So I'm now, I have a way to talk about it, see what's happening, transitions from one point to another point. Why is it that some preachers, when they go from point to point, it's real easy to follow with them, and others, it sounds like one big.
That's interesting because I think when I hear you talk about your philosophy of preaching, it reminds me of what I think the difference in preaching today. And when I say preaching today, I'm using that in context of mainstream popular preaching.
Okay.
Because preaching is eclectic, and when you start making these generalizations, and you need to put some specificity to your generalization,
right?
Which is that it's so sped up. It is so a part of the times of speed, quickly. I got to quickly know where you're going. I got to quickly become excited. And this crafting that you're talking about, I think Caesar Clark wouldn't be Caesar Clark if he
sped up
today, he was in here today.
Right.
He'll still be popular. He'll still be celebrated, but not at the same level because preaching is so, the cadence is sped up. The argument presentation is sped up. I need to know where you're going quickly as possible. Exactly. And there is, and I would say this, unhealthy being towards celebration, not hooping, but celebration, meaning there's always got to be some level of good news tied into every statement, even in the introduction.
Exactly.
And so this crescendo is often missing. And life, that's how life works. You know, you don't just wake up and have a Grammy. You don't just wake up and be on the box of Wheaties for a long jump. You sign up for the Olympics, and then the president of the United States decides you boycott it, but then it shifts to another whole field of work. When I hear you talk about that, I want to hear you talk about as well. Well, I would love to hear for you to respond as well to the type of preaching you're hearing today, and what concerns or, your critiques of, and again, I'm talking mainstream popular preaching.
Okay. I would say there's a couple of things. One is the preacher, the homiletician, the person who delivers the sermon, called by God, and on top of everything else I'm saying, George, first and foremost, you got to have that relationship with God. You got to be praying. You got to be walking with Him. You got to ask Him. You're just giving a speech. If God isn't in, the Holy Spirit in it, you're just talking and giving a speech. So I'm operating under the supposition or the assumption that you got to pray. God has to breathe on what you're doing.
Absolutely.
He's crucial in this. But there's some mechanical things we can do, and so forth and so on. I find with a lot of popular preaching, everything makes the person in the audience feels like they have no issues at all. People should have recognized you when they had a chance. God is doing something in your life. If they don't recognize you, let them go. And it's never you need to change or anything. It's other people. Other people don't realize what who you are, and people like hearing that about them. And it may be something completely
almost seeker friendly preaching.
Yeah, seeker friendly, telling what you want to hear. Now, here's a problem with that, George. This kind of preaching. The problem with that is, I had surgery on this right knee in high school, and I had torn my cartilage. When the doctor came in, he didn't say, "King, well, what do you think I should do, and how do you think I should do this surgery?" Because I'd have been like, we need to get another doctor in here if he's asking me.
Yeah.
He's the expert. We have allowed the audience to tell us what we're supposed to be doing. So they said, speed it up. We speed it up. Tell me where you're going right from the beginning. We tell them where we're going right from the beginning. If I'm the expert, I need to be practicing my craft in a way that they catch a hold of it and get, and get blessed by it, not the other way around. So I think a lot of our preaching is seeker sensitive, trying to be friendly with the audience, giving people what they want, which is the very thing Paul warns about. We're going to get to a time where people want to scratch itching ears. They got two problems, pathological. They want scratch itching ears, then they're going to turn their ears from the truth to hear fables. So we got two problems. And he told us that's what people don't want to do. And then for reasons of expedient or to make money, we go right along with that. My problem is I'm a little bit scared of God, because ultimately He's going to call me and put on the video and say, why did you say that? And why did you say I said that? So I'm a little bit scared of Him. And we have to really, with integrity, look at the text and say, is that what it's saying, what God is saying? I think too much of it is kind of smooth, make you feel good about yourself. The most least taught aspect of the Holy Spirit, the Bible says, when He is come, He will convict the sin. We're not preaching that. We're not trying to convict people. We tell the Holy Spirit to bring things to your remembrance. Holy Spirit to give you power. The Holy Spirit convicting you, that's not a sermon that we preach a lot. So I feel like a lot of modern day preaching is kind of just, telling people what they want to hear, making them feel comfortable, and not really what the Bible is saying. So I think we have a major problem there. And remember, there's no weights or balances or standard of what a real sermon is. Nobody quite knows. The people in the audience feel like if you finish on time and I can remember one or two of the points of the jokes, you did pretty good. You and I know better than that. It's not just about finishing on time and saying something the Greek word means and the Hebrew word means that. It has to be more than that. So if they don't know, then why are we looking to them to set the parameters of what we should be doing? So I think it's a major problem, and I think if you're going to be, I think being expedient is an enemy to being biblical.
It's Sunday. Thank you for that. It's Sunday. You finished preaching. You got to preach next Sunday. What's your process to get ready for that next Sunday?
Well, like you, I like to do series. And if I'm doing a little series, I got some momentum going. I know I'm doing the Sermon on the Mount, or I know I'm preaching through James, or I know I'm preaching on the Beatitudes, or I know I'm preaching on, whatever it is. So when I start, I'm going to be rereading the book, background, everything else I can grab about the subject. And then I'm going to chop up my pieces. And in addition, any good pastor, George.
What you mean, chop up your pieces?
I'm going to set the limits on how many verses I'm going to preach, or what we call a pericope, or a paragraph, or a thought. On the one hand, I'm going to exegete that Bible to know what I'm going to be preaching. And here's for the pastor, very important for the pastor. I'm also going to exegete my congregation. If I had last month 17 deaths, this month I'm not preaching on the 10 toes of the beast in Daniel. I got a whole lot of hurting people dealing with grief who may not know how to grieve biblically. What is God saying? Is He saying something through all of this? I got a congregation with at least 17 families affected by this. And as I prepare, I need to know what's happening in my congregation, because when I was with my uncle and I was a youth pastor and somebody invited me to preach, George, you had 3 sermons. I had A, B, and C. And you were going to get one of them 3 sermons. I don't care where your church was and what was going on. I was coming over with my A, B, and C. I found out, George, when I became a pastor, God said, what are you doing? I said, I'm pulling out the A, B, and C. He said, no. I said, what do you want me to do? He said, put out your hand. And I would put out my hand, and He would give me food for this flock. And If they were low in vitamin C, this was vitamin C fortified. If they low in vitamin D, this is vitamin D fortified. Now, he wouldn't literally tell me to put my hand out, but my point is he would be working on my heart and my mind to say, here's what these particular people need. And so if that letter from Corinth got confused with the letter of Philippi, it wouldn't even make sense. You got the joy and all that. Them Corinthians, they have no joy. They got cliques and they got all kind of stuff going on, and they got super apostles and they doing some stuff at Chloe's house. They never would have understood the letter from Philippians and about what was going on there, and how this particular church right here got upset with the pastor because he didn't include them in the offering. How dare you, Rev? You're not stealing our blessing. We ain't got a lot, but the little bit we got, we want to give. To that church, Paul says, and my God shall supply all of your needs. We want to apply it to the Corinthians. He ain't talking to them. They're not doing that. He's talking to people who are generous, who don't have, who still want to give. So I got to exegete my congregation and know what's going on. That's why I like what you do. You have some theology, you have some Old Testament and New Testament. You can give a balanced diet. But if there's a major issue going on in the church, you can't keep preaching over here and expect the church to be affected when you're not addressing the issues that are going on. Congregation. Yeah, there in the congregation.
Talk to us about your use of words, humor, illustration in your presentation.
Okay.
Because when you go to Mount Sinai, they find you very hilarious. They laugh and just enjoy you so much.
But listen.
Yeah. Then I say a joke, then hey, Pastor, we don't want to hear all that. But when you come, they get very...
Philip Brooks, who wrote one of the historic books on preaching, said that preaching is truth through personality. And if God called you to be a preacher, he called you with your personality, your quirks, your idiosyncratic tendencies, whatever they are. He called you with that Joel Gregory's voice and with Ralph West's mind and with Maurice's passion or whatever. He calls you, and that gospel is going to come through you. And so early on, I've always had kind of a quick sense of humor, off the fly, whatever, and it just kind of works for me. It can be corny or whatever, but it just always worked for me. And so when he called me to preach, I found out, again, I could do that. Now, when Noel Jones got to L.A., a year later, there was 20 Noel Joneses. Oh, I feel caught in here. And Lord, the ontological presence of the... Everybody's, all these young guys are trying to copy him, and you knew immediately. That wasn't... You hear... Donald Parsons, who tonight it's 10 in the morning, So people copy. I found out that when you tap one emotion, it's easy to get the other. And what I found out is what I call the difference between a joke teller and a comedian. A joke teller gets a funny joke, a story, he tells it and people laugh. A comedian observes life and makes you laugh, ha ha ha, and then think at the same time. And you're laughing at something that's a picture, and then right before your eyes, it turns into a mirror, and you see they're actually talking about you, and it can convict you and laugh at the same time. So I notice with humor, I can have you laughing and at the same time slip truth in there without you getting defensive and not receiving it. I love the Manuel Scotts and others. I love the Old Testament because it's pictures. If people can see something, if they can see and smell the Job's sores and sitting in that ash heap, if they can notice that over in the corner with a sinister look, as David is running from Saul and he's trying to find something to eat, and one of these guys is going to go back and tell Saul, and you can see him hiding in the corner. If you can paint a picture for people to be able to see, instead of telling them that when Nabal said, "I'm not giving any food to David," instead of saying David got mad because Nabal didn't say that, you said when he said that, David's heart began to pump like a volcano. A vein came up in the side of his neck. Fire danced in his eyes. He started to bark out commandments. You 200 men, get your stuff. You get the horses. Everybody load up, full military attire. We're going to see Nabal. When you can do that and people see, oh my God, David about to do something. I've always enjoyed that. Every Tuesday, typically, I go to the movies because a movie director is just like a preacher. He's trying to tell a story. So I just watch how you tell stories. I watch the form. I watch what they do. I watch what they don't do. Cops have cop stories have a similar formula. Comes up, there's a dead body here, there's a car there, there's a cop car here, lights are going on, there's yellow tape everywhere. Somebody pulls up looking like you, get out with a cup of coffee and said, Joe, what we got here? We got 2 down, the shooter was up here, it was a 38 caliber, we have some shells over here. They showed you what happened, and the rest of the show, we go back and figure out how did we get to this point. So I could take a sermon and start with David holding Goliath's head, and I can go back. How did we get to this point? How does a young shepherd boy end up being a hero? I watch movies. Movies all along, they're giving you little hints that don't make sense until the end. So if I can tell that Bible story and give you those little hints, and you go, oh my God, he was telling me all along, and now I see it at the end. So that the storytelling process is important to me. Words are important because a person can walk across a room, they can shuffle across a room, they can drag their leg across a room. Each one of those is a different picture. And so I'm really thinking and running this film in my head of what it would look like so I can paint a picture for my audience. And that's why I think I can pull people in and get them engaged, and then in the middle of that say something funny to relieve the tension, and then we go again.
Well, give us a couple good jokes you use every now and then.
Every now and then I talk about the fact that and this isn't a joke, but I have a picture of a guy sitting on the edge of a diesel truck. He has 2 of those big silver tanks in the back, and his head is down like this, George. And the caption says, "The man who delivers the gas ran out of gas." And I tell pastors all the time, when you talk about when you stay insulated. Yeah. George, we can be delivering the gas, and guess what? Run out of gas. Run out of gas. Don't run out of gas, and you deliver the gas. I'm constantly looking for things like that. Another thing I do, George, I'm gonna get to the humor part, the jokes, but another thing I do is a lot of preachers like to give an illustration over here, and they're talking about Ivan the Terrible had gold, and he didn't want anybody to steal it, so he put it inside a belt, and he was on the ship, and the ship was going down. He jumped down. The gold was so heavy he drowned. And you say, be careful of the love of money. And your audience is saying, if my name is ever Ivan and I got a gold belt and I'm in the middle of the sea and I drown, I'll remember that. What I would rather do is say, if I do what this Bible truth says or it happens in my life, what would it look like? If you got aught against your brother, go to him privately and tell him, and if he accepts you, you won your brother. I want my audience to know how that looks. Hey man, here's what you ought to do. This verse is saying this. You got a problem with somebody, you ought to say, hey George, man, let me take you to breakfast. I'll take you to Roscoe's. Yes. You say, oh man, yeah, you paying King? Yeah, I'm paying. Yeah. Okay, we get our stuff. I order the Obama special with the 3 wings, whatever. You get your stuff, and the waitress walks away. And I say, hey George, the Bible says if you got aught against your brother, you should let him know. And I got a little problem. What's up, King? What's going on? I said, man, you remember last year I loaned you $200? He said, yeah. I said, well, you remember last Thursday when you showed me the new watch you bought and you said you paid $1,000 for it? Yeah. Made me feel some kind of way, George, because you didn't pay me my money back. He goes, oh, King, I'm so sorry, man. I didn't know. You paid the money. Said you've won your brother. Now, my audience listening will say, I don't like Roscoe's. I'll go to Denny's. It's closer to my house. But King just gave me a talk track and a way to see what this verse means. So I think that's far more effective than just telling a story. If you can if you can paint a picture of what it might look
Real
like,
life scenario.
a real life scenario that can fit your audience. And again, you don't have to be so specific. They're going to do exactly what you say. They're thinking the whole time, I'm not going to go to Denny's. I'm going to go to my restaurant. I don't get up that early. I'm going to go to lunch. I'm not going to take them to breakfast. I'm going to go to lunch. But I got a talk track. I understand what he's saying. This King James word, all against my brother. That even sounds funny. So he told me in the NIV, it says, if you have a concern, an issue with your brother, whatever. So those are the kinds of things that, for me, not only illustrate, but apply to your congregation, to where week in, week out, year in, year out, you should definitely see some growth in your congregation. Because not only do they hear, but they know how to do it. We say stuff like, you got to love your neighbor. And I got 300 people with their arms folded talking about, I love my neighbor. And each one has their own definition of what love is.
Yeah.
Until you say, the person next door, the single mother that has a kid and they're going back to school and they don't have a backpack, you need to buy that backpack. That's love. Until you tell them that, they're going to sit there and say, I do love my neighbor.
Yeah. Generic. Nothing
Generic.
specific.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So those are the things to me that are more effective or most effective when it comes to helping your congregation. Because face it, very few groups of people spend more minutes in a building than us.
Yeah. I believe it.
In a lot of ways, we haven't benefited. So what's going on that we're spending all this time in here and lives aren't changed, lives aren't transformed. We're still acting the same, doing the same, no growth, no maturity.
What's some of your aspirations yet? Life ministry.
I would like to, George, pastor maybe a couple of more years, and then I would like to find a nice sized ministry and walk up to you and say, hey, George, I'm gonna do you a favor. I'm gonna take most of these seniors off of your hands. We're gonna take field trips. We're gonna do mission. We're gonna do this. They're not gonna be writing you letters and complaining about stuff. I'm gonna keep them busy because I got some background in church, but I don't want to be the senior pastor, but I got enough to teach and get them involved. So I'd like to come alongside somebody and help them out. I would also like to have some kind of a resource to help preachers with preaching. I don't know if I would call that mentoring or whatever, but just sharing wisdom and helping people, kind of like a personal coach in terms of stuff like that.
That'd be great.
And that's about it.
We're ready for the joke, man. We're ready.
No jokes today, George. I don't have any.
You don't have none?
I can't think of one.
That's wrong. Why would you do our audience like that? You see?
Y'all got to come in August to Mount Sinai, and y'all hear many jokes.
They'll be there. They'll be there whenever you're there at Sinai, which is annually.
And I love preaching at Sinai because they're a well-taught and preached to congregation, so it makes it easy to preach.
Yeah, man, we appreciate that. Tell us where we can find you. Tell us where we can find the church. What time worship services are.
Friendly Friendship Baptist Church, 10101 South Avalon Boulevard. That's close to Avalon and Century Boulevard. We have service at 9 a.m. on the dot, and we try to get you out no later than 10:15 out the door, even on first Sunday. So, and we're also online on Instagram, on Facebook, and YouTube coming real soon. We are doing some small groups, and we're doing some stuff in the community. This coming week, we'll be doing our Vacation Bible School. So all ages. And we do it with the sister church. We have a Hispanic ministry that shares our building. We do our VBS together. And that is, for most Baptist church and for us, that's our largest outreach to young people, children. We have a couple hundred children for 5 days in a row, and to introduce them to Christ and give them the opportunity. So we do everything we can for them to have a good time, but get the message and have the opportunity, if they would like to have a relationship with the Lord.
Wow, amazing, powerful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
For stopping by in the midst of your very busy and insulated schedule. Thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode here of Nuance Conversations podcast. Please be on the lookout for how you can support and for more episodes. We're out. Peace.